Before the world realizes, a date approaches in silence, March 31st. For many, it's just another day. For those who know the signs, it is the beginning of something much greater. A warning left by a man who defied time, logic, and human understanding itself. Padre Pio. But who was he really? We are not talking about a simple priest. Born in 1887 in southern Italy, Francesco Forgione was a man surrounded by events that even modern science could not explain. In the eyes of the Vatican for years, he was an enigma, loved by millions, feared by some, investigated by many, but never ignored. Before we continue, have you ever had the feeling that the world is about to change irreversibly? That ancient warnings, left by forgotten voices, are now coming true before our eyes? If you feel that there is something behind current events, something that goes far beyond the news, then this channel is for you. Here, we reveal hidden prophecies, silenced messages, and connections that many prefer to ignore. This is the place where mystery meets truth. Get ready. What you are about to discover now could transform everything you thought you knew. The marks he bore on his hands, feet, and side of his chest were not symbolic. They bled. They persisted. They were real. The stigmas that accompanied him for half a century made him an almost biblical figure in the 20th century. But it wasn't just the physical signs that caught attention. What really left everyone in silence was his ability to foresee the future. And among those visions, there was something different, something dark. Padre Pio is said to have seen an event directly involving the United States, a country that at the time was just beginning to emerge as a power. According to accounts preserved by close monks, he mentioned a punishment that would fall upon a distant nation, a symbol of pride and materialism, precisely on March 31st. Coincidence? Or a set date? He spoke of an extremely cold night, of a darkness that would begin just before midnight, and of millions who would be caught by surprise. Something that, according to him, would not be avoided by science or the world's great powers. Why this specific date? And why would the United States be at the center of such a disturbing revelation? The answers, until now, have been hidden among overlooked files and manuscripts. But the signs seem to be aligning, and the countdown may have already begun. If you think you've seen it all, wait for the next part. What comes next might be even more unexpected. The warning was clear, but it was ignored. For decades, the most enigmatic writings attributed to Padre Pio remained hidden, protected by monks, muffled by time, and in some cases, deliberately forgotten by the Vatican. But now, amidst an era marked by natural disasters, global tensions, and spiritual crises, one of these prophecies returns with frightening force. It speaks of a specific day, March 31st. It is said that Padre Pio, immersed in prayer, handwrote a sealed letter containing a revelation so disturbing that it could only be read in times of extreme necessity. According to sources close to the convent of San Giovanni Rotondo, this message foretold an event that would begin in the heavens and spread across the North American continent like a silent judgment. He described a wave of collapse, which would come like an invisible breath, buildings in ruins, cities silenced, and a cold never felt in those lands. A kind of blackout, not just of energy, but of all sense of security, something he called the pause of civilization. The words he used were symbolic, but laden with meaning. He spoke of a wind that does not blow but paralyzes, of a light that goes out without warning, and of men who will not perceive the end until silence becomes absolute. It was not just a physical phenomenon, it was something spiritual. Why the United States? Because according to him, that would be where the fall of the illusion would begin. The cradle of entertainment, the culture of abundance, the unbridled progress. Padre Pio saw this as a fertile ground for indifference to the sacred, and therefore, the first to feel the effects of the awakening. The words of Padre Pio were not vague metaphors. He described scenes of destruction so intense that they seemed taken from an apocalyptic vision, but not like those we have already known in history. For him, the world wars were just the precursor to something even greater. According to his visions, a new conflict, infinitely more devastating, would arise over a humanity that had rejected God. And it would not be just a clash between nations. Padre Pio saw the collapse of faith as one of the most dangerous signs. He reported that temples would be abandoned, sacred doctrines ridiculed, and the spiritual connection with the Creator would be replaced by human ideologies. A dark era would arise, not only on the battlefields but in the hearts of people. Over time, other visions came to light, warnings about the very earth rebelling. Seismic eruptions, furious seas, storms never seen before. He believed that the planet would respond to humanity's sins, exacting a price for such deviation. And today, as we observe the alarming increase in extreme phenomena, his words take on a chilling resonance. But no warning was as terrifying as what he called the 3 days of darkness. A revelation shrouded in mystery, repeated by mystics throughout history. But in the words of Padre Pio, it took on an even more disturbing dimension. He spoke of a supernatural night, where neither the sun, nor the moon, nor any lamp would be able to shine. The world would plunge into deep darkness. During this period, demonic entities would walk freely through the streets, and anyone who dared to look outside would not survive the sight of horror. The air would become lethal, and only those who remained silent, praying and trusting in God, would have any chance of resisting. Only blessed candles would illuminate the homes. No electricity, no modern devices would work. It was judgment, not just a physical punishment, but a spiritual one. And in his darkest words, Padre Pio made it clear: the United States would be the epicenter of something even more severe. Not everyone would be affected in the same way, but the land of freedom, due to its choices, could face judgment mercilessly. Among all the warnings left by Padre Pio, there is one in particular that has sent chills down the spines of scholars and believers. A grim prediction that, according to many, points directly to the United States. Will this nation be the epicenter of an unprecedented judgment? According to reports, the holy monk warned that clear signs would precede the dreaded 3 days of darkness. He described an alarming scenario: a global moral collapse, increasing violence in the streets, and a nature in revolt, responding to the world's sins with uncontrolled fury. Looking at the current reality, it is hard to ignore the parallels with these words. Financial crises spread like wildfire. Political corruption, inequality, and instability drive crowds to despair. Could we already be experiencing the first signs? But the vision went further. Padre Pio spoke of a world where fear would take over even the homes themselves. According to him, crime would spiral out of control, safety would vanish from cities, and panic would become routine. In several U.S. states, urban violence numbers are skyrocketing, and social polarization is further exacerbating this situation. Is the announced anarchy knocking at the door? Natural disasters were also among his predictions. He would have described a time when the earth roared with fury: earthquakes, colossal storms, devastating floods. Extreme events that today are becoming increasingly common and inexplicable. Wouldn't that be too much of a coincidence? But perhaps the most frightening point is the assertion that these signs are just the prelude. When all these tragedies occurred at the same time, the true judgment would be about to begin. And then the big question arises: why the United States? What did the priest see in this powerful nation? For him, the greatest danger came from within. A materialistic country, sunk in the idolatry of money, spiritually separated from its roots. According to his words, the powers would fall first, not by external attack, but by internal corrosion. And if that prediction is correct, the countdown may have already begun. If what Padre Pio predicted is indeed coming true, one question remains in the air: what is yet to come? His visions were not limited to spiritual crisis or loss of faith. He spoke of something even darker: a nation turning against itself. A country divided not just by ideas, but by fear, hatred, and distrust, where neighbors become enemies and homes turn into fields of tension. This internal division, according to him, would be one of the most evident signs that the collapse was approaching. And when looking at the United States today, it is impossible not to perceive the echo of his words. Political tensions have escalated to an unprecedented level. Ideologies have become trenches. Dialogue has been replaced by hostility. What once united faith, family, purpose now seems increasingly distant. But the most alarming point of Padre Pio's prophecy was reserved for a final decision. He believed that a crucial choice would determine the future of this great power. A decision between redemption or ruin. Not a political election, but a moral, spiritual, collective judgment. And the time for this choice may be running out. The scenario he described was of a civilization in free fall. A world where good and evil would be confused, where truth would be distorted and faith ridiculed, where momentary pleasure would take the place of virtue, greed and ego would be exalted while spiritual values would sink into oblivion. Nowadays, we see a society obsessed with status, comfort, and distraction, while church is empty and spirituality is replaced by ideologies. A silent moral void spreads. A people disconnected from the sacred, distracted, weakened. But Padre Pio went beyond faith. He spoke of the collapse of the very social fabric. Crime would soar, families would fragment, and the sense of emptiness would become an emotional epidemic. Anxiety, depression, hopelessness, symptoms of a lost generation, searching for purpose in an increasingly disconnected world from eternal truth. Are we witnessing exactly what he predicted? The slow collapse of a power, not through invasions or bombs, but by the very decay that corrodes its internal structures? For Padre Pio, the path to disaster was not definitive. There was hope for those who recognized the signs and returned to true faith. But the most urgent question now is there still time to change the course of events? The priest's visions were not limited to spiritual ruin. He also announced the emergence of an era of global conflicts, unlike any previously experienced. He spoke of wars spanning all continents, confrontations between global giants, and a series of events that would bring humanity to the brink of destruction. And coincidentally, or not, today we see the United States plunged into the heart of global instability, a superpower surrounded by fragile alliances, silent threats, and increasingly bold rivals. China, Russia, and other nations are vying for influence, and the balance that kept the world at peace seems on the verge of collapse. Padre Pio warned that the judgment would begin when nations stopped resolving their disputes with words and started resorting to absolute power. In his words, the conflicts would not be just physical, but ideological, spiritual. And the current scenario shows a divided, fractured nation, questioning its own identity. The distrust between leaders and the people is widespread. Protests, political clashes, and social ruptures are taking over the country. Exactly as the visionary foresaw, a powerful nation weakened by its own fragmentation. Even more unsettling was his description of weapons never seen before. Weapons coming from the skies and destruction coming from above. A prediction that today reminds us of aerospace technologies, cyber warfare, drones, and nuclear threats silently orbiting above our heads. If all of this is not a coincidence, then what lies ahead could be much more than mere instability. It could be the spark of something he saw clearly, and that we are now beginning to feel. The real question that echoes is, how much time do we have left before the final collapse? And is there still a chance to reverse the fate? In the skies of America, strange signs have been drawing attention. Lights appearing out of nowhere, impossible movements in the air, and noises that no one can explain. What was once treated as legend or illusion is now beginning to take on darker contours. Could these be the omens that Padre Pio warned about decades ago? Reports of unidentified flying objects, including those confirmed by U.S. military agencies, have increased dramatically. State-of-the-art equipment has recorded artifacts with trajectories and accelerations that defy all known laws of physics. While some claim it is secret technology, others believe there is something beyond human comprehension behind it, something that, according to prophecies, precedes an unprecedented global event. But the phenomena don't stop there. In different regions of the country, people have reported inexplicable sounds coming from the sky. Metallic echoes, like ancient trumpets, resonate without an apparent source. In various spiritual traditions, this sound would be the announcement of the imminent judgment. Padre Pio mentioned sounds in the heavens as signs of the beginning of the fall. And when we look at the latest solar anomalies, unexpected eclipses, and meteor showers, the question arises: are we witnessing the fulfillment of something much greater? Scientists warn that an intense solar storm could, at any moment, take down satellites, power grids, and entire banking systems. Would this be the modern vulnerability he saw in his visions? Because according to his prophecy, when the earth and the heavens aligned in simultaneous disturbances, the time of mercy would be about to end. And it wasn't just the sky that he pointed to as a sign. Padre Pio also prophesied a sudden financial crash, an economic collapse so devastating that it would render money useless. Companies would collapse overnight, and people, without resources, would find themselves fighting for food and shelter. The empty supermarkets, rising inflation, and the collapse of major banks seemed to be harbingers of what he had already foreseen: that humanity's material security would turn out to be nothing but an illusion. The question now is, do we still have time to avoid the worst? Or are the signs right in front of us, and we simply refuse to see them? The most disturbing warning from Padre Pio was not just about the fall of money itself, but about what would come after. He described a future where the financial system itself would cease to be a tool of progress and would instead serve as a weapon of absolute control. A digital, impersonal mechanism capable of restricting, paralyzing, and punishing. A world where individual freedom would be exchanged for convenience, and total dependence would become inevitable. Today, with digital currencies being tested by central banks, cashless payments becoming the norm, and algorithms controlling access to credit, that frightening vision seems to be taking shape before our eyes. Are the United States, the epicenter of the global economy, on the verge of being engulfed by this silent collapse? Padre Pio did not only foresee the market crash. He described a painful purification, a trial that would begin with the richest nations, precisely those that had distanced themselves from God. The crisis, according to him, would not be the end, but the sieve. Those who ignored the signs would be crushed by the consequences, but those who were attentive would have a chance to resist. According to his words, not all countries would have the same fate. Some would fall, others would be tested, and a minority, those who chose repentance, would find redemption. For him, the United States would be the epicenter of this decision, a privileged land, blessed with abundance, but that chose pride over faith. The result? A cycle of social unrest, increasing violence, disasters that seem to multiply, and a collective faith that disappears with each generation. All of this, according to him, would be the reflection of a people who have strayed from their spiritual origin. However, the Father also left an alternative. The nation could bow, recognize the signs, and return to its spiritual essence. But if it chose arrogance, the path would lead to chaos, destroyed cities, collapsing governments, and a void of leadership that would plunge the country into darkness. Maybe there's still time, maybe not. But if this is the final warning, what comes next could determine the fate not just of one country, but of all humanity. Before the darkness spread, Padre Pio left a silent warning. Nations would not be destroyed by external enemies, but would implode from within. They would be corroded by polarization, moral erosion, and the breakdown of the collective sense. When observing the current scenario in the United States, it is difficult to ignore the echo of his words. The cracks are visible. Political divisions have turned families into strangers. Ideological discussions have become battles, no longer conversations. The country that once symbolized unity now lives in constant tension, an environment where protests escalate into violent confrontations, where trust in institutions evaporates, and where every public decision carries suspicion. Padre Pio warned that this type of division was not just a political problem, it was a spiritual sign. He predicted that before the tribulation, a weak leadership would emerge, a society would be plunged into chaos, and a people would be immersed in insecurity. Today, with major cities facing waves of crime, justice being questioned, and authorities discredited, his vision seems less a distant possibility and more a faithful portrait of the present. But the collapse, according to him, would not begin with bullets or bombs. It would begin with the abandonment of truth, the day when right and wrong became malleable concepts, the moment when lies were celebrated, selfishness exalted, and faith ridiculed. And that is what many fear is already happening. The growth of secularism, the glorification of materialism, and the disdain for traditional values are clear signs that something has changed. Churches are emptying, religious voices are being silenced, and spirituality has been replaced by indulgence and distraction. For Padre Pio, this distancing from God was the most dangerous omen, because when a nation chooses to walk alone, it exposes itself to the consequences of its own paths. And he believed that this choice would define not only the political or economic destiny of a country, but its very survival. Even so, his final message was not about an end, but about a decision. He was not talking about inevitable destruction, but about a time of choice. The United States, according to his vision, would be facing a definitive moment. Between ruin or redemption, Padre Pio made it clear that even in the face of the abyss, salvation would not be completely out of reach. Faith, he said, would be the last refuge. It didn't matter the external chaos. Those who kept their spirit firm and their hearts turned to God would find protection where the world would only see despair. And today, this spiritual clash seems more alive than ever in the United States. While part of the population moves away from any religious conviction, another begins to seek answers in their spirituality, driven by a profound feeling of emptiness. The culture of excess, haste, and immediate pleasure no longer fulfills as it once did. And this awakening, although silent, may be what defines the nation's destiny. Padre Pio did not promise it would be easy, but he insisted there was still time. However, that window was closing. The decision must be made before the point of no return is crossed. Among his most disturbing warnings was the promise that the heavens would speak before the end. A phenomenon, visible to all but understood by few, would serve as the final warning, a sign for those with attentive eyes. In recent decades, the skies have offered more mysteries than answers. Lights that appear out of nowhere, movements that defy the laws of physics, strange noises echoing through the sky with no apparent origin. Even official bodies have begun to admit that something is happening, and they don't know what. Padre Pio predicted that close to the decisive moment, there would be unusual behavior of the stars. He spoke of changes in celestial bodies, of intense flashes, and atmospheric disturbances that would precede a period of total darkness. And that's exactly what is starting to take shape. Extreme solar events threaten the stability of satellites and electrical grids. Out-of-the-ordinary eclipses and unidentified celestial appearances are becoming increasingly common. For those who remember the prophecy, these are not coincidences, they are alarms. Padre Pio insisted the signs would come from above, and when they came, few would be ready to understand them. The darkness he described would be preceded by a final divine message. The question now is, are we listening? There comes a moment when the signs cease to be mere coincidences and become warnings. Father Pio did not speak by chance. His words traced a dark map of everything that now seems to be coming true. The warnings that once seemed distant now knock at our door. When he described a sign in the heavens, something that everyone would see but few would understand, he wasn't speaking in metaphors. He was speaking of a milestone, a point of no return. And now, inexplicable phenomena are appearing frequently. Strange lights, sounds echoing from the sky, abnormal movements of the sun and moon. The question is no longer whether they are happening, but whether humanity is paying attention. According to Padre Pio, This sign would mark the beginning of the true judgment, not as a sudden punishment, but as an irreversible sequence of collapses. First, the division would destroy the unity among peoples. Then the economy would collapse, leaving millions in despair. Next would come the war, not just with weapons, but ideological, spiritual, and invisible. Finally, the very earth would roar, as a reflection of divine anger in the face of human indifference. And if the United States is at the center of it all, and if this nation is, in fact, the predicted catalyst, the moral decay, the rising violence, the loss of faith, everything he announced is already among us. But Padre Pio also left a loophole. Those who see the signs, prepare themselves, and return to faith may still be able to resist. The window is closing. Perhaps the true meaning of their prophecies is not to provoke fear, but to awaken, because the time that remains is not for hiding, but for choosing which side of history each person will be on. The last chance will not come with trumpets, it will come silently, disguised as routine. If all of this is true, are you ready for what comes next? If this content made you reflect, then don't ignore the call. Leave your comment with what you believe is to come. Your vision can open the eyes of others. Like the video so that more people can discover these revelations. And above all, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this investigation into the secrets that history tried to bury. Because what is coming has not been fully told yet. And here, we will reveal everything. See you in the next video. And until then, stay alert.